Hello and welcome to Frank Conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I am Terry Ikumi. This week we turn our attention to the health sector, where Nigeria has recorded a feat worth celebrating. In June of this year, the World Health Organization declared that polio was no longer endemic in Nigeria. Thereafter, a lengthy certification process began, which eventually saw the complete documentation by the officials of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency and accepted by the World Health Organization team. Now, this milestone is significant, not only for Nigeria, but for Africa as well, as Nigeria was the last country left to get rid of the virus within its borders. And victory here has meant that the continent as a whole is now free of the virus, as declared by the independent body, the Africa Regional Certification Commission. But despite this great win, the threats remain, and gains recorded could easily be reversed if vigilance is not employed. It happened before 2016. So tonight on Hard Copy, we speak with the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, Dr. Faisal Shuaib, who's worked in the past few years both in the private and public sectors and has been largely geared towards the eradication of this disease on the continent. Dr. Shuaib, you're welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
I can see the smile on your face. It tells a lot. And it's safe to say that the results are in and we passed. It would be a stupid question to ask you how you received the news, considering that you were quite aware of what was coming because you were at the front of this whole fight to eradicate polio in Nigeria. So instead, I'll ask you this. Of what significance is the certification to you as a person, to Nigeria and Africa, considering that Nigeria, being the giant of Africa, was holding Africa back from being certified polio-free?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. It's without a question of doubt very massive for all Nigerians, both Nigerians living and Nigerians yet unborn. The certification of Nigeria and Africa as wild polio free means that we're now bequeathing to future Nigerians a world without the threat of paralysis or death from polio. You can imagine how in the last few decades, maybe centuries, how many Nigerians must have died or been paralyzed. If you look to the streets, especially in northern Nigeria, you see how many people have paralysis that is due to wild polio virus. So absolutely important that we must appreciate what we have achieved together as a country. So for me, it's a question of having multiple feelings, right? Feeling of excitement, I'm thrilled, but at the same time, I am humbled by the expanse of what we have achieved as a people. And it helps me reflect on what we can possibly achieve if only we work together, take aside all of our differences, pull together in the same direction. We can do amazing things, right? And in the public health space, when you see the kind of incredible work that we did with Ebola, how we're improving routine immunization, and how under the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, we're doing such a great work of trying to flatten the curve of COVID-19. So I think we can do amazing things, and future generations of Nigerians will look back at our generations and be really amazed at what we did together.
Well, indeed. You have worked on this for a while now. You did that while you were with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and now as the head of the primary healthcare in Nigeria. So how difficult was it for you? I know it's been a journey. How difficult was it getting here, considering that only a few years ago we held half of all polio cases in Africa?
It's been a long journey. It's been difficult, it's been challenging, but we've been able to overcome. It's been leadership on the part of past presidents, ministers, chief executive officers. It's been a lot of hard work on the part of frontline workers. They've been there, they've sacrificed their time. In some instances, we've lost lives, but it's also been leadership on the part of the traditional institution really coming together, encouraging parents, guardians to make sure that children were vaccinated. So it's been a tumultuous journey. It's been a roller coaster at times. There's been controversy, there's been hope, there's been dashed, but through it all, Nigerians remained steadfast. And this is why we got here. You will recall that one of the reasons why we got delayed was that in the mid-2000s, there was this controversy around the safety of oral polio vaccines. Some so-called academicians actually said there were anti-fertility elements in oral polio vaccine. But of course, in order to ensure that everybody was on the same page, what the federal government did was to ensure that there was an analysis, assessment of oral polio vaccine, and this was found to be untrue. But this was not before states like Kano and Jigawa actually suspended oral polio vaccination, and that increased the number of cases of white polio viruses in Nigeria, and even beyond Nigeria, because some WPV cases, the white polio virus cases that were seen in Asia, in the Middle East, were traced back to northern Nigeria. So that was really a huge setback. But again, as a people, we came together, looked at the problem, addressed the problem holistically, and then we came out of it.
What was the problem that you found out in northern Nigeria that was responsible?
Well, so the unique nature of northern Nigeria is that people listen to traditional leaders, particularly religious leaders. So when a so-called cleric mentioned that there were particular elements that might be anti-Islamic, then of course the followers were alarmed, right, and said, okay, if this is the case, government should do something. And the responsive government said, okay, can we take a pause and understand what this is all about? So this is what led to the lifting of that led to the banning of oral polio vaccines. But since then, the same state government provided the leadership along with the federal government to do analysis that now confirmed, along with traditional leaders. They went to different parts of the world where these vaccines were being produced and found out that it was not true there was any anti-fertility elements in the oral polio vaccines.
Can we say that we have surmounted that challenge now that it's not going to come back?
Absolutely. Because, okay, so we've been doing oral polio vaccinations for almost 30 years now, right? All of the kids that got the oral polio vaccines, Terry, the idea of having 5, 10 kids, right, all over the place, right? If there's anything, right, you'll be wondering if there's anything that will promote fertility in oral polio vaccines. But of course, there's no link whatsoever. We surmounted that challenge at that point because we took several steps back, engaged with our traditional leaders, our religious leaders, our political leaders, So the polio program now said this is not only about the technical aspects. There's a very important part of our lives, which is around our culture, our traditions. So we went back to the traditional leaders under the leadership of the Sultan of Sokoto, the Northern Traditional Leaders Committee on Polio Eradication and Primary Healthcare, went back to the communities and assured community members, assured religious leaders who were also part of this committee that there was no anti-fertility element in oral polio vaccines. And beyond that, they also took in public, they took the oral polio vaccines and they were not harmed by it. They gave their children in public. This is why in 2016, particularly with the residual doubts that people had about the safety of oral polio vaccine, when President Muhammadu Buhari, came out in 2016 and vaccinated his own granddaughter, that quelled a lot of doubt in the minds of a lot of Nigerians, because they know that if this was truly unsafe, then Mr. President would not vaccinate his granddaughter. And because of the integrity and respect that Nigerians have for Mr. President, of course, what we now saw was a situation where people were following and asking for the vaccine. They were going to the primary healthcare centers, they were pursuing vaccinators and asking for the vaccines and saying that, hey, you guys keep my house. Oh, we went to the farm and you guys keep my house. When next are you coming to do the vaccinations? Can we come to the health facility and get the vaccines? Now, at the end of the day, we believe that those clerics, those academicians are probably erred, right, in terms of their communication. To err is human, to forgive is divine. In the course of all of the work that we did, we had multiple meetings with all of these people, and I know that they meant very well. They did not mean to cause problems, so we were able to get on the same page, and there's now clear understanding that there's nothing that is unsafe about oral polio vaccines.
Dr. Faisal, you sound very reassuring, and we were in a celebratory mood, but words of caution have been offered, and that is saying, be careful so that we don't return back to something like this. I mean, it happened in 2016. If you could talk to us briefly about why we experienced those two new cases in 2016 and how we're putting measures in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. You see, caution is the right word, right? But we're in a place that is completely different from what we experienced in 2016. So in 2016, what happened and gave the impression that we had actually interrupted white polio virus transmission. We never did interrupt. It was a misnomer. It was an error, and we all in the polio program recognize that. So I'll give you an analogy. So let's say a house is on fire. It's a, say, 5-bedroom house, right? It's on fire, and you go to 4 of the rooms, right? And you find that, okay, the fire is no longer there. You did not go to the 5th room to ascertain that the fire was still raging or not. And you say, okay, the fire is over. Then a few hours later, you come back and you find that, oh, there's still fire. That is sort of what happened. So in Borno State, because of the insurgency, there were local government areas, communities where we could not access. But because we had done a very good job of vaccinating, the assumption was that because we did not report any white polio viruses from those communities that were behind enemy lines, that there was no white polio viruses. But when the military started recapturing some of those communities and children were tested, that is where we found 4 white polio viruses. So it is a question of we had not done adequate surveillance to make sure that each and every community was assessed for transmission of white polio viruses.
I'm curious as to how you've been able to do that now, because clearly insurgency still exists in the Northeast. Before we talk about the measures that have been put in place to ensure that we do not have any new cases, how have you been able to surmount the challenges of crossing into areas that are still under the control of insurgents?
Right, so Terry, like they say, once bitten, twice shy. After 2016, we knew that we had to cover each and every settlement and be absolutely sure that within the entity called Nigeria, that we had, within the best possible scenario, gone to settlements. So what we now did after the disappointment of 2016 is exactly what Mr. President asked us to do, that we should go all across the country. Here is 9.8 billion naira. Go and look and make sure that there's no white polio viruses before you say that we have interrupted white polio viruses. So what we now did was to engage with the military. We now developed programs that we called Reaching Every Settlement and Reaching Inaccessible Communities. So using technology, Geographic Information Systems, GIS, we're able to develop high-resolution maps, right? And we use satellite imagery to be able to look at the whole of the conflict areas. And we could see where maybe settlements had been destroyed, indicating that people were not living, and then where people actually lived, right? So with those maps, we took settlement by settlement, community by community. Along with the military, we went and vaccinated children. So very good evidence that in the course of the last 3 years, we've been able to reach over 10,000 settlements. And in 2016, we had about 500,000 children under 5 that we had not been able to reach with oral polio vaccines. By a painstaking and methodical process, using community leaders, religious leaders, we've been able to reach each and every child with the vaccines that they need. But not only the vaccines that they need, also with a package of health services. So it was going with malaria, anti-malarials, antibiotics. It was with really making sure that we're also able to assess their rotational status, working with so many multilateral and non-governmental organizations, our donors, very important donors like the Aliko Dangote Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, our development partners, Rotary International, World Health Organization, UNICEF, US CDC, the EU, like USAID, a host of partners work together. So this result is a result of solidarity, partnership that has taken us to a place that we never imagined we could be.
For us, we like the result. We'll take a break here and we'll be back. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Hard Copy. My guest is Dr. Faisal Shuaib, the Executive Director of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. And we're discussing Nigeria's and Africa's polio certification, as well as our primary healthcare status. Doctor, we were talking just before that break about the measures being put in place to ensure that we don't have a re-emergence of this case, because we can't sit back. It's happened before, as I said earlier. So what steps have you taken to ensure that we don't have that?
Right. So, since 2016, we've been able to build population immunity through multiple campaigns, multiple polio campaigns. So what that does is build the immunity of our children. But beyond that, we've also been able to increase routine immunization. So the campaigns happen maybe 4 to 6 times in a year. There are pulse campaigns. You go all across the country and give oral polio vaccine. That helps. But beyond that, you have to support it in the background by what we call routine immunization. Routine immunization is that process where fathers, mothers, guardians take children to the health facility and they take all those vaccines against vaccine preventable diseases, including oral polio vaccine and inactivated polio vaccine. Now, that process was not well developed before 2016, right? So when there was a survey in 2016 to assess our routine immunization, it was just about 33%. So if only 33% of children had the right kinds of vaccines, so you can imagine the large numbers of kids that were not well protected. So of course you continue to have vaccine preventable diseases, including polio. But what we have done under the leadership of the Honorable Minister of Health, especially in the last 3 years, is to more than double that number. So the last assessment by survey of routine immunization coverage in Nigeria is at 71%. This is massive. It's unprecedented. Globally, there has never been a situation where you see this type of rapid progress in routine immunization coverage within such a short time. So this is something that this government has achieved. This increase in routine immunization coverage is what will provide the required population immunity to stave off polio transmission. But we are also vigilant, knowing that there's continued polio endemicity in Pakistan and Afghanistan. That means that there's a likelihood that the virus may be imported because we now live in a global village. But above all of that, we're trying to strengthen primary health care.
When you talk about strengthening the primary health care, what areas are you looking at?
So what I'm talking about is that look at how we defeated Ebola in 2014. Look at how we've surpassed historical trends globally by more than doubling the coverage for routine immunization within 3 years. Look at how we're doing so well with flattening the curve of COVID-19. All of this is the effort of government to strengthen primary healthcare and global health security. So when we talk about strengthening primary healthcare, what exactly are we talking about? We're saying that we now know what works and what doesn't work from the lessons of the polio eradication program. The polio eradication program has improved our capability to look at data, to discern data, use evidence for action. So we know, for example, that you shouldn't go to somewhere in Anambra State and be looking for polio. It's not likely to be there. The data shows that that's not where it is. Anambra has one of the highest routine immunization coverages. So you have to use the data to predict where you're going to have transmission, and you go there. What the polio program has shown is how we can do social mobilization, interpersonal communication, right? How you're able to go to the households and talk to people in a way that is respectful, that is compassionate.
Doctor, we're almost out of time, but
yes.
There's something I need to ask you. Since you mentioned the progress made so far with the COVID-19 and your level of engagement, you have championed the cause for immunization since you took office, and I'm sure you're familiar with the suspicions that have trailed the COVID-19 vaccines. Put that together with the Infectious Diseases Bill amendment, and having worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the accusations against the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what do you make of this whole vaccine process?
To the best of my knowledge, it's all a ruse. It is important for people to use the social media to be excited about all kinds of conspiracies, But the bottom line, Terry, is there's no vaccine that will come to Nigeria, that will come to any Nigerian without going through all the ethical processes that are required. So it is, of course, nice for people to be armchair epidemiologists. You're on your phone and you can talk about the controversies. But I know with the integrity of the leaders of Nigeria, there is no way there can be any vaccine that will come to Nigeria without going through those processes. Recently, they talk about the Russian vaccine and whether Nigeria had applied to get some of them. And I said very clearly, no. We have to be sure that all the phases that includes efficacy, safety, no side effects, all of those trials has to go on, and we must have data. We must have the documents to show that all of those processes have been gone through. NAFDAC will also check and make sure that it is fit for consumption. So Terry, I want you to go to bed with both eyes closed, that before we accept any vaccines in Nigeria, we have to be very sure that they are safe.
Speaking of vaccines, there's a race for the COVID-19 vaccine. If eventually one is accepted, there's going to be a big problem, or it's going to pose a big challenge for developing countries like Nigeria. We understand that the UK has already ordered about 90 million of those vaccines. How do we brace up and prepare for something like that?
So we have already indicated interest in getting these vaccines. So there is what they call the COVAX facility, which is really a coalition of different countries, Gavi, the Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, different pharmaceutical companies, our donors, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, who have come together to make sure that this would not be a situation where the richer countries will have more access. So they are now having this kind of coalition to ensure equitable supply of the vaccines. So once any candidate vaccine gets approved, there is no way any country will get more because they are richer or they are more powerful. It's going to be equity. So for example, the first thing they are going to do all across board, especially among the developing and developed middle income countries, will be to ensure that 20% of the population get first tranche. And 20% of those populations will be focused on those who are in the front line, the people that are vulnerable, the very old, the people who have comorbidities. Those are the people that will first get the vaccines because they are the ones that are likely to come in contact with the virus. So there is a very systematic way that we're engaging globally. Nigeria is not left behind. If there's anything, we're in the forefront of engaging with these countries, with development partners to make sure that we get the vaccines.
That is very encouraging. Dr. Faisal Shuaib, thank you so much for coming to speak with us on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much, Terry. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Dr. Faisal Shuaib is the Executive Director, Chief Executive Officer of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. That's the program tonight, but we want to hear from you, so send a message to hardcopy@channelstv.com or tweet at CTV or directly to me at Terry Ikubi. Speaking of which, let's take a look at some of your feedback from last week. At Lanre Odej says, truth be told, the APC and PDP lacks what it takes to move Edo forward in this 21st century. Both the pastor and Obaseki are Oshomole's products, which is not what an average Edo person is yearning for at this time. At Joshua Obera 35 says he's not doing less for you than he did for Godwin Obaseki. He takes you around to local governments, kneeling and begging everyone to forgive his uppity and vote for you. He's the face of your campaign. He leads and you follow him. What else is he to you if not your political godfather? And at Agidigbio J wrote, Oshomole has apologized for his negative statement about Pastor Sergei Zeyamu and he has accepted. Together we are voting out Obaseki come September 19th, 2020. And finally, Elliot from Benin wrote, I want to use this medium to tell you that what Mr. Izeyamu came on air to say is a big fat lie. Obaseki has done a lot. Well, keep sending those messages, and if you miss an episode, go to our website, channelstv.com, or listen to our podcast on channelstv.com/podcasts. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Terry Ikomi. Good night.
Channels Television.